Part 2, why you need a security system for your house. The house had 2 bedrooms on either hallway and a bathroom. The bedroom doors were closed, but the bathroom door was creaked open. I was so lucky in that moment because he sprinted to the bathroom. That gave me just enough time to open the attic access in my closet and pull myself up. As I lifted myself, I heard the person run towards my room. I had just pulled my feet inside when my bedroom door burst open. He walked in and stopped. When he didn't see me, he went and checked the other room, then came back and turned on the light. A moment later, he ripped open my closet door. After a few seconds, he stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. Then he went downstairs. I had left my phone when I ran for the closet and wasn't sure I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I counted to 1,000, then climbed down to call the police. My bed had been flipped, furniture knocked over, and all my things destroyed. The only thing missing was a knife from my kitchen. The police found that the side door had been forced open by a crowbar. They also found cigarette butts and an empty tube used for drugs. They think he had been watching the house for a while. I installed some security on the house after this. I can't imagine what would have happened if he had come to my room first. Crime Fanatic Friday, the Tylenol murders of 1982. On the morning of September 29th, 1982, a young 12-year-old girl named Mary Kellerman had a sore throat and a runny nose. She told her parents of her symptoms, who then gave her 1 extra-strength Tylenol capsule. They had no clue that the capsule was laced with potassium cyanide, which is highly poisonous. By 7 a.m. the next morning, Mary was dead. That same day, a 27-year-old postal worker named Adam Janus died of what was initially thought to be a massive heart attack. However, this also turned out to be cyanide poisoning. His brother and sister-in-law both took Tylenol capsules from the same bottle Adam used earlier that day. They also died within a couple days. Over the next few days, 3 more strange deaths occurred in Chicago and Illinois. They all had one thing in common. They took Tylenol shortly before they died. In October, investigators made a connection between the poisonings and Tylenol. The gelatin-based capsules were popular because they were slick and easy to swallow, but this also made them easy to be tampered with. The manufacturers of Tylenol immediately took to the media, issuing mass warnings and recalling more than 31 million bottles. As time passed, the case continued to confuse police, the drug manufacturer, and the public. Crime Fanatic Friday, Part 2, the Tylenol murders of 1982. The manufacturers of Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson, put out a reward for anyone with information about these random murders. Tainted capsules were discovered in early October in stores, but luckily they hadn't been sold or consumed. The police gathered that someone had taken bottles off of the shelves of their local stores, laced them with poison, and then returned them to the shelves to be purchased by unknowing victims. Unfortunately, the perpetrators of these murders have never been found. Before this crisis, Tylenol controlled over 35% of the pain reliever market. Within a few weeks of the murders, it dropped to 8%. Johnson & Johnson developed a new tablet that was just coated in that slick gelatin. They also introduced a tamper-proof packaging that made it obvious if they had been opened. They invested $100 million, which in a year rebounded sales and secured their spot for the nation's favorite pain reliever. In 1983, Congress passed the Tylenol bill, which made it a federal offense to tamper with consumer products. Other manufacturers also made products that were tamper-proof after this disaster. The tragedies that occurred can never be reversed, but they inspired a series of moves that made over-the-counter medications safer. Storytime about how I found out my boyfriend was married. I had just moved to a new state and decided to download Bumble to meet new people. One day, I matched with this great guy named Alex. He had a good job, his own house, never married, and no kids. We lived in the same town and we started spending a lot of time together. However, I noticed that Alex started doing some weird things. He started coming over unannounced. Before he left, he would always check to make sure that the doors and windows were locked, and when I wasn't with him, he was always blowing up my phone constantly asking what I was doing. A few months into our relationship, he introduced me to his family and I introduced him to mine. It also turned out that we had a ton of mutual friends. He knew my new best friend Laura and her husband from the gym. When we made the connection, he made it clear that he didn't want me being friends with her anymore. Anytime I would bring her up in conversation, he would get agitated. Laura and I were both teachers at the same school. One afternoon, she came storming into my classroom. She told me that she had just had a girls' night with the girls from the gym. They were all showing pictures of their wedding since one of the girls recently got engaged. That's when she noticed that my boyfriend was in pictures with another woman. It turns out he was the husband of one of the girls that she was having dinner with. Part 2 of how I found out my boyfriend was married. When my best friend showed me the pictures of my boyfriend and his wife, I was livid. I saw red and immediately texted him telling him to come over to my house to talk. He ended up calling me on the way home from work but refused to come over to my house until I told him what I wanted to talk about. When I told him, he automatically started blaming my best friend and her husband for telling his business, saying it wasn't theirs to tell. I felt so angry and betrayed, but most of all, I felt stupid for not knowing. I told him it was over and that I was done with him. I didn't hear from him again after that. He moved away and no one at the gym had seen him either. A few months after everything happened, his wife posted on Facebook saying that she was getting a divorce. It turns out that he had beaten her up so badly that she ended up in the hospital. This abuse had apparently been going on for months. I felt that it was a blessing in disguise that I had gotten out of that relationship. Seeing how controlling he was within just a few months of dating, who knows what would have happened if I didn't find out and kept dating him. Luckily, I haven't seen or heard of him since 2018 and I hope that I never do. Storytime about how I had to choose between my family and the love of my life. I come from a pretty well-off family. Growing up, I never had to worry about anything because it was always taken care of by my parents. They were pretty religious and we would attend church every week. From a young age, I knew that I was attracted to girls. I also knew that my parents wouldn't accept it, so I buried my feelings deep. Luckily, I was never tempted because I never met anyone that I had feelings for. Fast forward to my senior year of high school. I was on the volleyball team and a new girl named Juliet had transferred to our school and joined the team. We quickly became friends, but there was always a lingering connection between us. I had easily developed a crush on her, but I knew that I couldn't act on it. During spring break, we went to a party and liquid courage led me to confessing my feelings for her. When I told her everything, she kissed me and I felt butterflies fluttering in my stomach. We secretly started dating after this and only my older sister and best friend knew about it. However, the more time I spent with Juliet, the more I knew that she was the one. One night, I finally built up the courage to tell my parents. Unfortunately, the reaction was worse than I expected. They yelled, cried, and told me they'd never accept it. Then they told me they would cut me off and kick me out if I kept seeing her. I was scared and didn't know what to do. Part 2 of how I had to choose between my family and the love of my life. After my parents gave me the ultimatum, I was terrified. The next day after school, I met up with Juliet with the intention of breaking things off. When I told her what happened, she comforted me and told me that it was okay. She said she understood it was an impossible choice and wouldn't blame me for choosing my family. She just wanted me to be happy and do what was best for me. Juliet loved me enough to let me go, even though I knew it was killing her. This was the deciding factor for me. As much as my parents loved me, they didn't accept me for who I am, but Juliet always had. While my parents were at work, we went to my house and packed my things. I called my older sister and she took me in with open arms. I cried to her for a while because I knew that I would never speak to my parents again. A few years later, my sister was getting married and she wanted me to be her maid of honor. Juliet and I were still together and happier than ever. I knew that my family was going to be at the wedding, but I didn't care what they thought anymore. I walked in hand with Juliet and saw my parents' face drop at our entrance. The rest of the family made eyes as well, but we ignored them and enjoyed our night. A year later, I proposed to Juliet and she said yes. Even though I lost my parents, I don't regret my decision. Eventually, we'll make our own family. This is how I found out my childhood best friend was a ghost. I grew up with a girl named Katie Wells. I lived on a farm and Katie lived with an old woman named Irene in the next house over. Katie and Irene weren't related, but whenever I asked Katie about her, she would just change the subject. It seemed like they never got along because they never talked to each other. Katie seemed really sheltered and I thought it was because Irene wouldn't let her do much. Whenever I would talk about boys or a new celebrity crush I had or even a new popular TV show, she never knew what I was referring to. A while later, my mom ended up quitting her job and working from home, so she didn't take me to Katie's house to have Irene watch me anymore. I remember wanting to go over to see Katie, and I asked my mom a few times, but she always said no. I eventually made new friends, and me and Katie grew apart. A couple years went by, and I started to realize I never saw Katie around anymore. She used to talk about her dad, Pat, a lot, so I assumed she went to live with him. I saw Irene outside one day, and I asked her how Katie was doing and where she'd been. However, she just looked at me like I was crazy. She told me that she had no idea who Katie was and that no one has ever lived with her. I told Irene about how we used to play together at her house, and she gave me a weird look and asked me if I was feeling okay. This is when things got strange. Part 2 of how I found out my childhood best friend was a ghost. The more details I told Irene about Katie, the more she looked at me like I was mental. She assured me it was just me and her in the house when my mom would drop me off. I was shocked. I went home and asked my mom about Katie, and she gave me the same confused look Irene just gave me and told me she didn't know what I was talking about. I couldn't believe it. How was I the only one who remembered her? I was starting to think I was going insane. It even crossed my mind that maybe Katie was an imaginary friend that I made up when I was little. However, I vividly remember playing with her every time I went over. I thought about it for days and I couldn't get it out of my head. The mystery kept me up at night and I even dreamt about my old childhood friend. I decided to do some research on Irene's house and my heart sank to my stomach when I realized what happened. I discovered the first person to ever own the house was a man named Patrick Wells back in 1941. I tried to find anything I could on Katie, but nothing came up. I remember Katie talking about her dad Pat when I was younger. It finally made sense how she never knew about any recent events I would bring up and why her and Irene would never communicate. I realized that I was the only one who saw Katie because she wasn't alive. I had been playing with a spirit all that time growing up. Here are some of my favorite products, part 2. I really love Morphe's Dip Brow. It's a great dupe for Anastasia's and it's only $12. Recently got the NYX's Epic Liner and I really like it. However, Wet n Wild is really good too and it's only like $4. So as far as palettes go, I think you all already know. Anything Morphe. I got a bunch more. I buy these when they're on sale. I don't pay full price. When they're having their 40% sale, I be getting them for like $8. This Inglot Durline is so good for when anything dries up like your dip brow or any liners that you have. One drop of this will turn it back to new. Colored liners, I love using the Pastels by NBA Cosmetics. Also like the Clarisite palette that I recently got. They're both water activated and they last forever. I love the Juvia's foundation stick or the Wet n Wild contour stick. They both work really good, except this one's $20. I've seen it on sale for like $10 before. This one's only like $5 and they work the same. Those were a few of the products you guys always ask about. If there's anything else you guys want me to talk about, let me know and I'll make part 3. Story time about how my assistant youth pastor groomed me. I grew up in a very religious household. My parents forced me to go to church with them, but when I was 15, they let me choose which church I wanted to go to. Being the rebellious teenager that I was, I decided to go to church with my neighbors who I knew did recreational drugs and didn't take it seriously. After going to this church for a while, I developed a crush on the youth pastor. Even though he was 10 years older than me, I thought he was cute. There were some red flags right off the bat.